Good evening. Welcome to the School of Visual Arts. My name is Tom Hoon. I chair the BFA program in Visual and Critical Studies, and that program is sponsoring this evening's event. This evening we're very, very fortunate to have, all the way from Istanbul, Professor Ivana Jevtic. Ivana is going to be talking with us about Byzantine art. I'll just briefly tell you a little bit about Professor Jevtic's background. She studied art history originally in Belgrade. She's a native of Belgrade. Then she moved to Paris, where she studied for her master's and PhD at the Sorbonne in art history. And it's important to know that the Sorbonne has the oldest institute for the study of Byzantine art, going all the way back to the 16th century. So it really is not just the oldest, but the premier place in the world to study Byzantine culture and art. She has taught in both Paris and Switzerland. She now, for the last 5 years, has been teaching in Istanbul at Koç University. She's published widely on the topic, of course, of Byzantine art and architecture, both in French and increasingly in English. And one of Ivana's many interests is in really pressing for the importance of Byzantine culture, Byzantine art and architecture. I only learned today from Ivana that in Turkey it's really only been going on for 10 years that the Turks have decided we're going to study Byzantine art and architecture. So Ivana's very interested in trying to continue in Turkey the study of Byzantine culture, Byzantine studies. And I mean, briefly just to say one of the many things that motivates Ivana is that, and what makes her such an important person to have come talk to us, is she's really interested in the way in which visual form communicates meanings, whether that has to do symbolically or in terms of narrative. This is where her heart is. Of course. So please, without further ado, join me in giving a warm welcome to Professor Ivana Jevtic.
So my topic this evening will be about narration in the last centuries of the Byzantine culture, period that is known as late Byzantine period, starting from mid-13th century up till the end and the fall of the Byzantine Empire in 1453. But before I really start with what is my topic, there is a bit of introduction for those who are maybe not so familiar with that Byzantine culture and Byzantine Empire. So what do we talk about when we talk about Byzantium? We talk about Christian, Orthodox, medieval culture and civilization that lasted for almost 1,000 years. We talk about a very powerful empire in the Eastern Mediterranean, having its base in today Turkey, Greece, and the Balkans for the most part, and having as its capital the city of Constantinople, Istanbul today. The Byzantine culture has left us incredible art. The way for many of you to get to know Byzantine art here in the States, well, you have lots of possibilities. You can go already to the Metropolitan Museum. There are fine artworks and objects you can see in the galleries, and there is, a few years ago, there was a new gallery that has been reinstalled in the Metropolitan Museum, presenting Byzantine art objects. So going to the Met is a good thing. There is currently a show, the National Gallery in Washington, called Heaven on Earth, that also presents various collections Byzantine art, so you have an actual show now taking place. And of course, there are many exhibitions organized, particularly in the past 2 decades, that deal with Byzantium. So it's a culture that interests people. It's not a medieval culture that everyone kind of forgot and put in a closet. Not at all. Byzantium has a lot to offer, and it is very intriguing. And I think for those who do art, who are interested in art, Byzantium is something that at some point one has to look, at least look at a bit of the artistic heritage of that culture. So, what is the most recognizable art form of Byzantine art? It is the holy image icon. It is a very particular image for veneration, for devotion, for religious purposes, that also has a very particular aesthetics, showing you in a portrait manner representation of a holy person in this highly focused composition, with of course accent on the face, on the gaze, and on conveying the idea of a presence of a holy person in the image. That is the most recognizable, let's say, art form, and very often Byzantine art is somehow equated with icons. But however, icons are important, and indeed Byzantine studies deal a lot with icons. It's not all. Byzantine art is not only about icons, and it's not only about this type of representation. There is also something else. So there is a very, very rich and very wide category of images in various types of media that deal with something else. Not individual portrait-like representation that has as its purpose religious veneration and focus, but something else. Image that is telling you something, that is representing an action, that is depicting an event, narrative. Image that, through its formal means, conveys a certain narrative. That category is very, very present in Byzantine art in various media, but for some reason, not for some reason, but for various reasons, it has somehow been taken for granted and not truly studied. As if, you know, what is an image? That's action. It's illustration, you know. These images were very often they are called, they illustrate Gospels, Bible. It's basically illustration. So somehow they were put in this category of decoration, as if decoration is something bad, and not truly discussed neither the aesthetics nor the processes in which action is represented in such images was not truly studied in the Byzantine field, as if nothing is behind those images, just a pure illustration of some text. Well, my research is exactly about that category of images, and I want to point to this neglect and to show and to express that I do not agree with it. And what I want to do in my research, I focus on late Byzantine period, because in those centuries, narrative images explode. They are everywhere. In we have icons that now have narrative elements. We have narrative images on the objects. And of course, we have narrative images in the context of public spaces where people could see. Most of those narrative cycles and images are preserved in churches, and they deal with sacred history. Unfortunately, secular architecture and buildings for mosaic decoration and cycles that existed in palaces, and we know through text exist that illustrate beautiful histories and triumphs of Byzantine emperors. Unfortunately, they are not preserved. So I will not be showing you that. What I will be showing you is mainly religious painting from late Byzantine period, where the concern with narration, with the telling, is the utmost priority for artists. And what I want to do is to show you why this is important, and of course, at the end, ask some questions why narrative images in the last centuries of Byzantium become so important. What significance did they have, and what do they reveal about the society of that time? How in a broader context of Byzantine society and culture can we understand this growing, increasing interest for narrative art and narrative images? So, narrative and narration, telling, account, is of course a universal phenomena that has lots of course, implications and consequences. Telling is remembering. There is a psychological dimension to whatever is narration. Narration is whether in verbal literature, it can be literature, it can be historical writing, it can be any writing. Narration is essential form of human thinking, allowing people to present, to establish, to communicate a knowledge, experience of a certain shared reality, or that shared reality becomes a shared reality through images, through narratives that societies and cultures construct. So narrative exists from ancient Egypt, comic books, and of course moving picture, cinema. We all talk about very important art forms in which narration, narrative processes and methods and strategies are fully developed. Byzantium was Byzantine and Christian culture was from very early centuries very much concerned with the most important narratives, the narratives of Bible and Gospels. And we find them from really the beginning of the Christian art in various mediums, showing you an early Christian sarcophagi from Rome for 4th century, a very early gospel illustration from the 6th century, deal with, of course, events from the gospel and their depiction, their representation. The narrative images are, let's say, the leading role in developing narrative images was, of course, taken by books, by illustration, by illuminated manuscripts. They really had a leading role for centuries in developing narrative images, narrative cycles, and for a most particular reason that in that context we have a very close and intimate relation between, of course, the text and the image that illustrates or that visualizes the text. So mostly throughout early centuries and then something that is called Middle Byzantine period, manuscripts had for a long time the leading role in developing narrative images. When it comes to monumental art, architecture in churches, they start to include, and most particularly after a period called iconoclasm, churches, Byzantine churches, start to receive through mosaic decoration or fresco decoration images that again depict various cycles, important feasts of Christian church, important events, again, from the life of Jesus Christ. But what is interesting is how those images in those centuries, I'm giving you an example of a church from a monastery from early 11th century, where in fact not entirely preserved, but narrative images, sorry, let me show you. Narrative images are put in special spaces designed for them, and I will show you how they look like. They look like this. They again contain some specific elements which we can link and connect with icon dimension of images. The protagonist of the scenes, here we have descent into hell, here we have a crucifixion. The elements of the setting of the scene, of space and time, are absolutely absent, abstracted. What counts is, of course, this golden background, situating those events in some dimension out of time and space, filled with the divine light, where expression is reduced to its minimum, and where the protagonists are like in icons facing the other. Here, the narrative aspect is very, in a sense of developed narration, action, or structures that would include other elements, like the elements of the setting. They are not present in such images. But then what is interesting is that from 12th century onwards, Byzantine narrative images start to change. And I think this image is a very telling visual to that change. Now, spaces, setting is much more lively present. It is a landscape, and most particularly, there is motion and emotion in the image. If in the previous tradition in monumental art that both motion and emotion were very much constrained, as if to show that even in the crucifixion, one is beyond pain, one is beyond aspects of human existence. It's interesting that from 12th century onwards that starts to change, and Byzantine authors start to talk about living painting, about painting that can speak, a painting that is lifelike, that brings events from past, that brings the suffering of protagonist to the present, makes the viewer see as if he is present there. So emotions, and quite violent emotions, are present, and they absolutely influence the way body is depicted, the way face is depicted, movements, even the landscape, the hill is everything is touched, everything is moved, everything is turning around, everything is feeling the suffering of Virgin Mary over her dead son. So this emotion and emotion continue to be developed in the centuries I am working on, called the late Byzantine period. And what is interesting is that architecture, interior architecture of churches from 13th century onwards gives a lot of place to narrative images. Practically, when you look at the walls of the churches, there is not now a single space that is left without an image, and those images are put in horizontal cycles in which one episode after another follow each other in a sequential order. That overload, that charge with images, with cycles, with scenes, with events in the interior of churches is something, let's say, of a relatively new development, and it is something that culminates throughout the period that is called the late Byzantine art. And in order to make you understand how it is to be inside and to think of how those images what kind of sensation and response such images would provoke with the viewer, I made this summer a short video, and I hope it will work out. And I will be able to show it to you. So, okay, it's my own, so it's not perfect.
But that's a hard picture to get because of the sun coming through.
Just catch the angle.
Are you taking video?
Well, I should improve my skills, but I hope you could sense what it means to be inside of such a building. Look where we are. There is not a single image. Exit, exit. Okay. But it's very important how space interacts with the persons inside, not only through its shapes, but with whatever comes and is laid, layers and layers of something on the walls. It's not just decoration. What is important is when you're then inside, you can really, you have these sequential images moving, or you are moving, you are turning around and making them move. And the history, the sacred history, is unfolding from the beginning, going all around, all around, all around, and you can see its end. And then you lift your head even higher. There is another cycle, there is another story, then there is another layer of history, also going in, all of them going practically around you. And you are in it. You're immersed, you're absolutely in it. And what I think is when we visit, of course, monuments, we stay 1 hour, 1 hour and a half, and then coffee time and whatever, and we leave. But this is a church in a monastery, for instance. So whoever was there for days and days and hours and hours. So it's not occasional glance and then I'm gone. It's a constant looking and constant thinking and constant engaging with images. Those images are not icons. Those images, you do not kiss them and you do not pray to them, but they do have an impact on you because we don't know. Bible, Gospels tell us elements and things that happened, Christ's life, passion. This is something much more powerful. It's something that visualizes that history and brings that history not entirely in the dimension in which we are, because all those cycles you could see are not on our level. They go up and high. So there is an element of I see them, I connect with them, but they are not in my world. They are another dimension of time. But there is a dimension of time, and there is a dimension of let's say history, of sequences of a beginning and of an end, of various stories. So the something like that, this type of interior is what you find in the period I'm working on, and it will also continue in the later centuries when Byzantine Empire will be gone and Christian populations mostly living under Ottoman Empire will continue to do that type of art. This constant overwhelming presence of narrative images that illustrate various cycles will be absolutely integral part of that art. So it's not something that, here is this idea, what I wanted to the idea of one zone, another zone, another zone, another cycle, filled. It feels as if you are inside of that. It is like you are in a book, inside of a book. And now you're reading, you're looking at the images and participating in the process of visualizing that history. And let me now show you some more particular images and interesting things that we can look at in terms now of how a story is depicted, told, represented. Here, for instance, you have a very good example of how now narrative images are filled. There is no background, abstract background. The space is full. Whether it is architecture, whether it is supernatural, whether it is this the inhabitants of this world, full of participants. The event represented is the event of the death, the Dormition of the Virgin Mary, which is the central event, and the sorrow of the apostles over her death, and of course miraculously Christ taking her soul up to the heaven. But that's not enough. That's not enough. An artist, in order to really tell a story, introduces something like a tiny little episode, like a prologue, something that precedes the main scene, where you see her alive, saying goodbye to the women of Ephesus, and then on the other side, the main event finishes. What do we have? We have the epilogue, what comes afterwards, where her body is being taken properly to the funeral. So the prologue and epilogue are, again, these are classical elements of literature narration that is now applied in the visualization of the event, with, of course, something Byzantinized very light, very much. This is a certain rhetorics in which elements are put in a contrast. So here she is alive, here she is definitely dead, here she is standing, here she is alive, lying. There is a whole language of rhetorics that now is not verbal, but that is present through formal means of composition. Here we have other interesting aspects of, again, narration. A scene of prayer at Gethsemane Garden, in which Christ, of course, in order to show time and within one single picture unit, show you different sequences of an event. We have Christ here thinking, praying. Here he is on his knees praying to God, and here he's going down to wake up the apostles and communicate with them. So like a filmic event of Christ moving and by being represented in the same image in several places to convey that action happens, that time passes between these sequences. Another aspect that narration in late Byzantine period deals very much are emotions. Whether those emotions are emotions of tenderness, of care, and a number of expressive gestures and movements that now images include, that seemingly would seem realistic. Something that would be a logical situation in the context of the birth of the Virgin, that her mother is on a bed being tired after the childbirth, with her servants helping, bringing food, attending, the little cradle being prepared for the baby, the bath, the communication between depicted persons, the heads, the gazes, the gesture gives this very powerful effect and situates this scene in something that could be a kind of emotional reality, recognizable reality for those who look at this image, although the scene itself is not truly realistic. There is so much of the style in the representation. The architecture behind is absolutely not in any way proportional. It is in the size of the humans, and it cuts, it blocks the view of the background of the image. So we are constantly between emotions, motions, gestures, something that is a certain something that has a certain reality or seemingly reality, and at the same time there is always this aspect of that happening somewhere above us, somewhere outside of our direct world. And that is something what we see, for instance, it's the same theme of the birth of the Virgin, where you have so many of the details and episodes added that's not only illustration of certain textual. It's also really bringing this event to life by again this seemingly reality, liveliness of gestures, of emotions, of seemingly realistic situations. And there is one detail I would like to point here. Always these secondary figures that appear behind the walls, that go in and out, that look at what's going on, as if, you know, they are the spectator looking at the scene. Something that will be very much researched afterwards in the Renaissance painting. Details that also add this kind of anecdotic aspect, as if these holy events needed an emotional input, or an input of something that is funny, anecdotal, that gives them this touch again of genre scenes, like in this scene of multiplication of bread and fish, where together with the main scene you have this seemingly realistic genre detail that adds to the narration by showing children that play with pieces of bread that have fallen from the baskets from where Christ was giving the bread. Like also here, look at this image. This is the baptism of Christ, which is full of all kinds of details that do not really have a relation with when you read. When you read the Gospels, there is absolutely no notion and no mentioning of all of that you see in the image. Where does it come from? Why is now the need to put all of that anecdotal, funny, seemingly mystical aspects in the holy history? And this is again. How do you present figures? How do you convey again a certain idea of elements of action within one event? These two are among my favorites because they show how Byzantine artists use elements of landscape to situate various episodes of one single event. For instance, these incredible stylized hills, rocks that are absolutely fantastic with this kind of peaks. Everything is part of that event. The curves of the rocks serve to host protagonists of the event. When you look and you follow the curves of the rock, you basically go from one episode to another. The landscape kind of leads you from one scene to another, and this is the similar principle in even more elaborated manner. And of course, what is most striking when you look at many of the narrative images is, of course, besides tenderness and this love and lovingly feeling that for some reason very often protagonists have, there is of course this accent of drama, of utmost suffering, utmost pain in relation to the scenes of Passion of Christ, that absolutely transform how those images look like. But just look at how the faces are represented. In a way deformed atmosphere deformed to the point of being totally ugly and repulsive by the pain, and that is something that is very interesting. This concern with drama, with dramatization of the events, concern with these high up emotions, because the similar concern, we see it also in religious narrative painting that from Duecento period is produced in Italy. The idea again of touching the viewer, of making the viewer connect with what he sees by showing hard emotions, Christ's body deformed in many ways, and similar tendency in religious painting will continue to exist throughout the Renaissance, and mostly it will in a way kind of culminate in something that Image have chosen, some of those really very well-known images from, let's say, late Northern Renaissance, and then, of course, the beginning of Baroque, where religious art, narrative art, continues to exist and continues to develop either through colors or through dramatical light effect. Again, this giving this most dramatic, most passionate dimension to the sacred history, the history of Christianity. Why that? Why these? I have given you some just the snapshots of. There is much more that can be said about each of those images. So, why is such a concern with a certain way of presenting the sacred history in the period of 13th, 14th century, 15th century in Byzantium, but in a certain way also in the West? How can we understand those images and their importance? Some of the answers, at least the answers that I am thinking, is that this period of 13th and 14th century, the last centuries of Byzantium, were in a certain way the end of that civilization. It is also a period when Byzantium is very much interacting with the other world, the Western world, as well as the Islamic world. Something is very much changing. Something is changing, and this utmost exuberance of the style, like we see in these images. Just to show you the contrast, I should have put it in behind. Look at the contrast with this. Stupendous contrast in many ways. I somehow tend to understand it in terms of what Edward Said was elaborating, the late style, the style of the end of cultures. He had this very interesting book about the late style, as if, you know, the growth of cultures and development of cultures in a way corresponds to the growth of and life of a man. And there are things and aspects of style and art when it is in its beginning, and there is also something that is when it is at its end. And this drawn, dramatic, passionate, charged art would be one element of what he calls the late style, or we could call it something like the fin d'époque. Or to give another example, telling, the need to tell, the need to memorize, the need to put as much details into certain narratives makes me really think in a certain way of the old age, when you have grandparents that tell you for 1,000 times the narratives of the family, the narratives of the history, with as much details as possible, and the young ones don't even want to hear it. So there is this very important concern with bringing this sacred history really to life, maybe because it is doubted, or maybe because it should be now approached in another way, maybe because things are changing in the society. And this accent on narrative image and making them much more charged, much more lively, much more communicative, with full of motions and emotions, although staying within the premises of the Byzantine style, might be in a way an element or a sign of let's say fin d'époque, the end of one culture. So do you agree or not? But it's very important. This it is in fact within a religious art of late Middle Ages that many techniques of expressive painting were developed. Of course, they will be later on developed much more, but look at this image. I mean, look. This is, look at what the color does, the work of the color, the exaggeration, the features of the face. That's the Atmos expressionist style, still in the Byzantine manner. But it is within the religious painting of Renaissance and late Renaissance art, through this strong emotional impact and research, that religious painting continued to exist and to be still appealing to a new society. So many techniques will be developed, especially in that late period. The close-up Renaissance will work very much. We work within the religious art as well. The closed-up plan, which will later on have such an important influence in representation of human body. And it's in a way the legacy of that late period that will be developed further. The Byzantine artist, for many reasons, we talked today about icons and this, all the special knowledge and techniques. They were, for instance, a trained icon painter in Byzantium had a fantastic knowledge of minerals, of glues. The technique of icon painting is a very particular technique, as you know, using metal layers, and then anyway putting the color in layers and layers and layers, and not modeling but through layering. So they had fantastic skills as painters. And then what is also interesting is that practically from late 12th century, again through this emotional channel, icons become appreciated in Italian society. We don't have as much Byzantine or anyway icons made in Italy as we will have throughout the 13th century. So there is this similarity in desire for piety. But for what kind of a piety? That piety is not a serene piety. It's this, dramatic, charged, emotional piety. And Byzantine artists go to Italy, they work there, they're absolutely appreciated for their knowledge of colors and paint, of mosaics. And they bring this maniera greca to Italy, and it will flourish throughout the 13th century. So that is an interesting point of contact that one has to explore more. In what way, again, this concern with the seemingly reality of sacred history will bring Italian artists into something else, exploration of reality, of material reality, or how would you, through perspective, represent absolutely realistic situation of a Madonna holding a child. Byzantines will never go into that. But there is the same desire for picturing sacred history in another way, not static anymore, not abstract, but charged, full, alive, through various methods of narration and representation. And basically, religious art is in a way flourishing, and Renaissance is still very much about religious painting. It is, in great extent, religious painting. Absolutely, yes, and not to lose. Let's say not to lose what still is very important, and it is nevertheless remembering and perpetuating the memory of that history through. But I believe that in case of now Byzantium, narrative images opened the door to, in a certain way, innovation and new things in Byzantine artistic forms. And what is interesting that in that period, even icons become narrative. From 13th century onwards, we find icons that are called hagiographical icons where you have in the center, again, representation of the saint, and all around scenes and narrative of his life. So there is, this is a fantastic example of how two of them are different, but also, again, connected and playing, interacting in a new art form. Even icons become more narrative in a later period. That's absolutely interesting to look at and to think about. Let's say as in terms of, for instance, psychology, when something is clear, when the meaning is very clear and precise, or the content, very few elements suffice to pass the message. When you have to add, you put, you fill it, it might mean that something is either threatened or something is gone, something is not entirely clear. There is a certain layer of a content, of a message, that might not be as clear as it had been previously, or might be in danger of a doubt or reconsideration. Therefore, you need to build it up. You need more, in order to make the same truth stand. In a certain way, I would, in a way, really understand. So it really, this overcrowdedness of images, and that crowdedness is also, I mean, people. Angels, architecture, this incredible look. Everywhere you have this totally weird, you see? They are everywhere, everything is everywhere. There is very little space left alone. It's like a fear of emptiness, horror vacui, that we have also in culture. So the fear of, whether it is a fear, but there is anyway a need to fill it up to the maximum, that the message passes undoubtedly and gets to you. There are two aspects. This idea of sequential imagery is very interesting in the context of church decoration, because that sequential images again bring the holistic history into aspect of human existence and human time. While in the church, normally their presence and their development on the walls should be part of, let's say, cycles of the church, time and the understanding of time and history through church. So not everywhere you have these truly sequential images. You can have interruptions. You can have images being in their own frames or being separated with architecture, which is common. And there, in particular cases like the one the one I showed you, I would say that it simply puts an emphasis again on this historical aspect of. Yes, yes, and that's why you feel such images with details that might refer to reality or realism. Then it's okay to have them in the image. It's interesting. You have this layer of, history, imagine history, then this reality that is symbolical, and then there is this reality that is a seemingly reality of movements, of gesture, of tender aspects of everyday life. All of that put together. Historical aspect, time.
Okay then. Thank you, Professor Ivana
Oh.
Jelena.